Hi, y'all. We're starting to get into the history of English. Hopefully, you already watched the videos or the video that I put up about the Anglos, the Saxons, and the Jutes. Um, that's some interesting storytelling and very quick history about who those people were, a little bit about their culture, and the timeline of how they came from their homeland to the island of Britain. Here, I'm leading you through the reading for exercise 6. So, the reading for exercise 6 comes from chapter 4 and a little bit of the slides, just to hold you accountable for doing this reading and for going through the slides. First of all, take notes while you read. There'll be a quiz in class. That quiz will be exercise 6. You can use your notes, so take good notes. And if we're not in class together, we will do the quiz somehow on Moodle or elsewhere. Okay, and this is the video that I asked you to watch. It's broken down into phases, so feel free to take breaks between phases. Phase 1 is just the beginning of the chapter. It's pages 49 through 55. So let's take a look at that, and I'll tell you what I want you to focus on. This is the backgrounds of English. So this is not the background of just English. It's the backgrounds. So it doesn't focus on Old English. It focuses on what we call Indo-European languages, excuse me, and how basically what we're looking at is how Proto-Germanic broke off from other Indo-European languages. As you know, Persian, Kurdish, those are two Indo-European languages. They're much different from German and from what we know as English. So let's just take a look at why they're so different. You guys should read through page 49 through 55. So this just gives a little bit of the background of what we're talking about when we talk about Indo-European. It talks a little bit about the Indo-European culture. A lot of what we know about culture comes from the words that we've found. The most common words are going to be words that were used quite a bit then. So there's this honey-based drink that they would ferment and make into alcohol, and it was called mead. That word shows up a lot in old texts because they had these places called mead halls, and they would spend they would spend a lot of their time there. So it was a prominent place where people came together, kind of like a pub, and that word shows up a lot in a lot of the manuscripts that we found. And there are a few other examples here. It talks a little bit about the Indo-European homeland. So this is the land that the Anglos, the Saxons, and the Jutes came from, and then also the other Germanic tribes that helped to fall the Roman Empire. This part talks a lot about cognates and how we know a lot about the languages, the Indo-European languages, and how they're related from cognates. So if you remember from when you learned English, cognate is a term that means multiple words that seem to be derived from the same word. So cognates, even across languages, are words that maybe sound similar or are the same, but they're definitely derived from the same old word that we used to share within Indo-European languages. It's interesting to take a look at those examples here. To keep reading, it talks a little bit about how we discovered Indo-European languages, how we know that they're related and come from the same family. This paragraph here focuses on only one example, the example of father, and it compares those cognates across a bunch of languages. I think that this chapter is pretty good in that it just focuses on really specific, small examples. It will give you some examples, and then usually the next paragraph will tell you the answer to a question that's brought up. For example, here it's talking about father and its cognates in various languages. It's asking how we can tell that they're the same. because there's so much similarity that's reinforced through other languages. We are looking for explanations of those resemblances, and then they give you the explanation here. So keep reading through these pages. It tells you a little bit about language typology and what language family means. So it uses this metaphor of a family, a mother, a daughter, and we use family trees to describe languages. So it talks a little bit about what that means here. If you guys know anything basic about language, you have to know about language families and family trees. Okay, so keep reading through the rest of this page. There are some examples here. And then we get to page 53. And we finally talk about non-Indo-European languages. Okay, so for those of you who speak Kurdish natively, or if you consider that to be your native language, you'll learn a lot about the background of your language. For those of you that speak Arabic or speak Arabic natively, or you think of that as your native language, this is the part that goes into the non-Indo-European languages and where they come from. So as you probably know, Arabic is an Afro-Asiatic language. It's considered Semitic. Back when we were first naming languages and looking at historical linguistics, we used the Bible for everything because it was mostly Western people who were doing the studying and publishing. It doesn't mean other people in other parts of the world weren't studying, but they weren't publishing in English, which is the dominant academic language. This brings up really interesting kind of sociolinguistic and ethical, theoretical type questions. You are totally welcome to question that and to ask those questions. But the language groups are taken from the Bible, and it's actually taken from the three sons of Noah, who, of course, many people in the world believe to be fictional. Some people believe him to have been real, but we use it as a kind of metaphor of looking at like the spawning of three new groups that are the foundation of humanity as we know it today. Again, feel free to question that. Okay, so it talks about the Semitic groups and the Semitic languages. If you're interested in Arabic, take close note of this and learn something about it. If you're not interested in Arabic or Semitic languages, read a little bit about it and perhaps it will incite your interest. But you should know a little bit about it, especially being from this part of the world. All right, so it goes on to talk about other non-Indo-European languages, including American Indian languages, which I find to be pretty interesting. Basque, which is based now mostly in Spain, but in the region of the Pyrenees Mountains. And then Uralic languages. Okay, so I ask you to read through page 55. Phase 1 sort of ends right here. And then you can start phase 2. I do ask you to read the rest of this page, the main divisions of the Indo-European group. So let's just check the assignment. Phase 2, read page 55. When the chapter starts dividing information into branches of language families, you can choose which branch you want to focus on. But you should start by looking at the language trees tree on page 56 and 57. Okay, so visuals are really helpful. Read this part. Since you guys have gone through the structure of English and you know a little bit about phonetics and phonology, you're going to know what he's talking about here. So, example, he says Indo-European languages, there's a palatal k, and it was a distinct phoneme from the velar k. All right, so you know what palatal and you know what velar mean because we studied that. If you don't remember, go back to your charts that I gave you. And there's also lots of extra charts that I put on the drive. Just remind yourself what that means. So try to make this k sound k, using the palate, so the top, the roof of your mouth, And then try to make the k sound using the velar, which is in the back of the mouth. Remember what phoneme means. What do we mean when we talk about distinct phonemes? Well, we're talking about these two sounds having their own folders, and inside their own folders, they have allophones, remember? And it all depends on phonetic environment. So remind yourself of what that means so that you know what he's talking about here, and just, take note of how that's interesting. Okay, so here are the trees, page 56 and 57. It gets cut off right here. You can imagine the book being open and the rest of the tree being over here. It's on this next page. So just take a look. Look at the languages that you know. So you do know English. You know a little bit of Old English. A couple of you know some German. So you can look and see how German broke off into these three branches and then where these branches went. So we have Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, Icelandic. We have Frisian and English over here. And then some languages from the Netherlands up down here. Okay, and then on the next, there's Italic, there's Hellenic, there's Celtic, which is its own branch. There's Breton, Welsh, Cornish, and then Gaelic. We discussed those in the previous video. We can look over here at some Slavic branches. Notice that Armenian and Albanian are their own separate languages. They don't have lots of branches. That's interesting, and you can, if you look at a map, you can kind of tell just geographically maybe why that might be, right? Why there aren't tons of varieties and branches there. And then you see, so Kurdish is derived from Old Persian and Modern Persian. Okay, so it starts to divide these paragraphs. This chapter starts to divide into these branches, basically, all these here. So you don't have to read all of these pages and about all of these branches. I want you to choose at least one that you're really interested in. Maybe don't choose ones that are very tiny and don't have a lot written about it, because if I ask you a quiz question and I ask for some substantive, in-depth answers, you won't have a lot to say. But if you're interested, please read it, but then also choose something that has a little bit more substance. I don't know very much about Baltic languages or Slavic languages, so if it were me, I would probably choose this. Because I'm curious and I'm ignorant. Hellenic languages are what Greek are derived from. Italic, you can guess, Latin, Portuguese, French, Italian, Spanish. If you're interested in Celtic languages, that could be cool because, Proto-Germanic and Celtic mixed and became English. So you might be interested in reading about this. However, the Romans did influence Celtic just a little bit because they were there before the Anglo-Saxons came. Everyone should read this part about Germanic because this is what we're studying. And that brings us to the next phase. All right, so you make your choice. I explain that here. I say don't laze your way through it because we'll have a quiz question and I want you to be specific, so take notes. Phase 3 is continuing to read about cognates, inflections, and word order. It's pages 62 through 71. So you're going to know what they're talking about here because you've studied the structure of English and the structure of how sounds go together, how words go together, and how sentences go together. So most of the words here you guys will expertly know. Isn't that exciting? I want you to read through the examples, but I also want you to look at the tables with examples. After you look at the tables, go back and reread. Maybe you might understand a little bit more clearly. Take note of these specific examples. They're really helpful. Here are some verb inflections you can see between Sanskrit and English. It's just cognates that they're pointing out using inflections rather than whole words. And that's just morphology. That's what we looked at in class together. Okay, so you're going to read through all of this. Let's see, noun inflections, word order. And that brings us to major changes from Indo-European to Germanic. All right, so this is exciting. This is the next phase, and it'll answer the question of, all right, so how did Germanic become so much its own thing? Well, start phase 4, read through page 74. And I want you to read through those paragraphs. Oh, so you've read this part. I think it's 6. Oh, no, it's 7. It's just 7 points to read through for that. Okay. And then I want you to start reading through some sound shifts. You can skip the first sound shift. You can read it if you like. It does talk about some of the phonetics that they know about Indo-European languages, and then it compares it to Germanic languages versus the other Indo-European ones that we have a lot of evidence from. But these pages are easy to look through, and it might be interesting to you. But start here with Werner's Law. Right? So start reading here for everyone. Read about Werner's Law, their irregular development of the Germanic languages. And there are some really specific examples. It talks about Old English a bit. It gives you some examples of these sound shifts. And then also on page 74, it talks about West Germanic languages. So you should know the divisions of the Germanic languages. It's just one paragraph. So read it, know it. That way you can be an expert on it. Know that they were divided into North, East, and West. And that's because they were divided into cultures, basically, and they developed their own linguistic features. This continued on through the century and through 1,000 years, and ended up being divided by class, which was essentially just divided by how people earned their money. And it eventually became something called High German and Low German. It was a social division that created even more social divisions. There's been a lot of studies on the differences between sounds and then how people treat each other based on those sounds. It's pretty interesting. It doesn't go into it here, but it's just something that you guys should know. And then that's basically the end of it. I think I say to read one more thing. Oh, no, that's it. So that's all you need to read. Okay, thank you very much, you guys. I hope that it's interesting to you. Take notes on things that you find interesting and email with questions. Thank you very much.